Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon. I'd like to call this informational meeting of Tuesday, October 5th, 2021 to order. I'd like to make a note that Councilor Brecky is on the phone and listening in. We're going to start off this morning with our audit committee, this afternoon, excuse me, it's been a long week, with our audit committee report. Councilor Neitzer.
Thank you. I'm going to give this report on behalf of our audit chair, Councilor Kiley, who is absent. The audit committee met yesterday. We received 3 audit reports. First was a Spectra food service contract. Spectra is the food provider out at the events complex. The second audit report was a Midco Aquatic Center cash handling audit, and then a travel expenditures audit, which covers travel and training expenses that city employees incur and use travel cards for that. All 3 of those reports were very thorough, and I think you'll be impressed by them when they're presented to you at a future informational. We reviewed the status of the 2022 audit plan, which the committee will see in December or January. By the end of the year, Ide Bailey will provide an update and an overview of the 2021 external audit. And lastly, audit showed their audit board software, which is much more efficient way of doing audits than they had done in the past, and was a good investment. And some other policies and procedures that they're working on, and they're also working on essentially a handbook for new members of the audit committee to essentially give them an orientation, because it's kind of a technical committee, and having something to kind of help you get started would be helpful. So very productive, good meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd just like to add, as I said, and also they're very thorough. There are a few money issues that they could handle a little bit properly, but in each case, the audit committee identified there was no fraud, waste, or abuse in the system. So that makes me feel good that we're doing good as a city. Now at this time, councilor remarks. Councilor Starr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple of things. First of all, I got a little ahead of myself with the Multicultural Center that we are starting over the process of hiring a new executive director, a process that will engage the community and those people that use the services. So had some really good candidates that applied, but we're at that process where we wanted to go back and open it up to the community and the community that served there. So I think you'll see the interim executive director, Lori Knutson, stay on for at least another 3 to 4 months, depending on how that goes. Maybe renewing she's been on a contract for 6 months that ends in the middle of October. So the board meets next week, and we'll probably consider extending that process and starting the process over again. So as updates go. The other is that wanted to thank all the city employees who were part of the flu shot clinic this afternoon. It was very a quick process that were there engaging students as part of their training. A lot of South Dakota State students. I'm not sure they're accredited, but maybe they potentially could be. So there were a lot of employees that participated in the quick in and out. I was there for 10 minutes or less. I barely walked in the door and in and out. And so it was a great process that was run by the health department and other departments. So,
thank you. Any other council remarks? Councilor Neitzer.
I just wanted to share that the Cherry Creek Bike Trail, which is we added to the budget last year, is progressing nicely. I think we funded about $1.5 million for that. It came in, the bid came in at about $1.25 million. They are just about ready. They may even start actually paving tomorrow. They've got essentially the base course in and got it all ready to go. And if they can get that paved, then the last thing is going to be the bridges. There's, I think, 3 bridges that go over the creek. Those are probably going to come in November or December. There's a pretty big delay on those, another COVID issue, but they'll have basically abutments ready so that they can just set the bridges when they come. So hopefully the bike trail will be open and ready to go by next spring. So exciting. Thanks.
Thank you. Good stuff. Seeing no other council remarks, we're going to jump right into our presentations. The 2021 code adoption. Butch, please give us what you got, sir.
Good afternoon. Butch Warrington, Chief Building Official. I'm going to talk to you about what comes around every 3 years. Adoption of the new codes. Right. Currently, we're under the 2018 I codes, and we're going to go to the 2021 with your approval. I can tell you they're already starting to work on the next code cycle, the 2024 code cycle. So this is a moving process. They keep finding things, and I'll go through a few things, and hopefully you'll understand. Now, this is not for the electrical code or the plumbing code. Those have to be adopted by the state first, and then they'll come to me at a later time. So I expect the plumbing code will probably be this spring after legislature approves, usually adoption about the 1st of July or so. Electrical code, that's in a couple more years. Significant changes to the 2021 IRC. They changed the definitions a little bit on us. So now a townhouse is considered whenever there's 3 or more units. And so it's a 2-family unit when there's only 2 units. The big significant change there is the 2-family units. So now whether there's a property line or there isn't a property line, they can be constructed the same. And that's going to make a big difference to our home builders, because as this next slide shows you, they don't have to bring that wall all the way out to the exterior anymore like they have. There's options there that they can stop on the interior. This is a big change for our builders, especially those who are building 2-family units. We think it's a good move. We're going to still be a safe, but yet it's going to be a good move for the builders so they can cut their costs just a little bit. I'll get into some of the significant changes. One of them is a vapor retarder, and that's the, shall I say, plastic that goes underneath the concrete. There was a change in the code this last section where they wanted it to be 10 mil thick. Talk to the builders, talk to the inspectors. We're staying with 6 mil. We're going to amend that back to 6 mil as a local amendment. We haven't had any problems, so I don't see why we have to go up. Another one is under slab duct. It needs to be insulated now. Well, talking to the mechanical inspectors, mechanical inspection manager, Gary Clarenbeek, said that's very difficult to do. It's very time consuming and very expensive. So we're going to remove that as a local amendment also. Whole house ventilation in a new single family dwelling. This has been something that has been very cumbersome in the past. We've tried to address it with not much success, let's put it that way. But this year we came up with a very simple solution. We worked with the home builders. We asked them for their approval on this. Last time we came up with something that wasn't quite as good and they didn't care for it, so we left it the way it was. This time, there's a couple of different ways they can do it. One is by putting a 4-inch round into the return air duct, so whenever that furnace runs, it's going to be bringing in fresh air into the house. Another one is to have makeup air in the mechanical room, and then they can put a 20 CFM exhaust fan as far away as they can that runs continuously. And you can get them that they run very quiet. And then if you need, usually it's in a restroom, as soon as they flip that bath fan, it'll go to a higher speed, just like normal. But I think this is gonna work. We thought long and hard about this. So this slide I wanted to show you because right now, energy efficiency is a big deal. We're hearing a lot about it. We've decided to keep everything for the same as what we have in the past. And I wanted to show you where we're at. We're kind of a combination of all of them, but it's been like this for the last 2 code cycles. You can see where it started in 2006 of a 49 R value in the ceiling. That stayed that way up until the adoption this year of the I-21 codes. Then they're going to a R60. Everything kind of went up this last code cycle. We're going to keep it the same. Asked the home builders if they wanted to go up. No, they didn't have any interest in that. But it is still something we're trying to work on, keeping that thermal envelope there. I had to make a few modifications in the codes this time because of this, because they actually require 4 different ways to do it, plus a mandatory another way. We left that in the code, so it's there. If they want to use it, they can, but they don't have to. Here's some items that we've modified locally, either this year, mainly in the past. The first one, handrails. This is something we came up with this year. It's been in the code for years and years. Anytime you have over 3 risers, you have to have a handrail along the stairs. Well, you don't have to have a guardrail when it's 30 inches or less. So you could have a landing at the top in front of your door that didn't have to have a guardrail, but you had to have a handrail. Well, we'd go by after a week or so, those handrails were removed. So we're just going to make it easier on them. We're not going to require it if there's not a guardrail required. Once there's a guardrail required, then they have to have the handrail. And this really applies to between 24 and 30 inches when that landing at the top is not required to have a guardrail. And then some of the next ones, egress windows, we've kept it at 5.0 square feet where the national requires 5.7. An egress window can be 48 inches from the floor. And the reason we do that is for garden level houses, because they have that 4-foot concrete there. We don't want them to have to frame that out. You know, it's a cost savings for them. The stair risers, we allow up to 8 inches where the national code is 7 3/4. The balusters, we allow up to 5 inches and national code is 4 inches. And the requirement of floor protection on the underside of a home. This is something that was a little bit controversial a few years ago. The council at that time didn't want us to put floor protection in, so I've kept with that. And what that is in an unfinished lower level, you would have to sheetrock the bottom of your floor trusses or I-joists, whichever the case you had. If you had hard sawn lumber, you wouldn't have to, but the reason being is because hard sawn lumber doesn't give way near as quick as the engineered equipment. Another one we kept up is a detached garage does not have to have frost depth footings until it's 1,500 square feet, whereas the national code is 600. Another one that runs into a lot is you're allowed to have a 200-foot bump out on a house without getting any structural engineering. We can look at that close enough. We haven't had any problems, so we're going to stay with that. The other one is smoke detectors. When you have a remodel project, we do require smoke detectors to be installed. However, we don't require them to be interlocked. Working with fire prevention, it's always felt it's better that we have smoke detectors than necessarily having them interlocked. Another one, decks are allowed to be within 3 feet of a property line without any fire resistivities. The national code would require it to be 5 foot. And we talked about the required sealing of ducts. The national code would require you to seal the duct throughout the whole system. We only require it within 10 foot of the furnace or in the mechanical room, whichever that is. And I wanted to point out sprinklers. They're not required in a single family dwelling, but that was taken away by South Dakota Codified Law 11-10-5. They do not allow us to put require sprinkles in a house. There are some in town, but it was because we couldn't get fire apparatus to them. So at that point in time, we wouldn't give them a permit until they agreed to sprinkle it. But it was all about the fire apparatus not being there. Okay, now the significant changes of the IBC. If you're a builder and like to do buildings, it's an exciting time to be a builder and an architect because there's 3 new types of construction. It's called type 4, A, B, and C. And what it is they use mass timber. It's amazing. You can have like a 16-story wood-framed apartment building now if you wanted one. We had a gentleman from ICC come in and give a class this year on the significant changes. As I'm listening to him, I get passed a note from a gentleman sitting behind me and says, I'm working on one of these. So I'm hoping that we're going to get one here shortly. But that's one of the reasons it's detrimental that we adopt this, because this does give the builders another option, you know, and that's what a lot of our code is. It gives them options on what to do. It's not necessarily you have to do this. It just gives you options to do things, you know. Another one is door swings. Used to be you could only have a 48-inch wide door, swinging door. Now you can go any size you want, provided you have the hydraulics, that the pressure that you use is okay. Whoops. It gives us guidance on charging stations, and that's charging stations for an automobile. Doesn't tell us we have to put them in, but it gives us guidance on when they're installed, how we have to do them. This time they added a section on assisted living toilets. This is something I've had to do, modify locally once or twice. And what it is when you are in an assisted living home or a nursing home or something, and that person needs help on both sides to use the toilet, now you can put in swing up grab bars so they can have a person on each side. It doesn't have to necessarily be really close to a wall. Added a section on water bottle fillings. There again, it's not required, but it gives us guidance. Public restrooms must now be screened. So, and can you look into the mirror and see if you see a urinal? You're going to have to do something different now. So, landings on the exterior of a building, they now have to have frost depth protection. What happened was some of them didn't have frost depth. They would raise from our freeze thaw, and then they would block an exit door that couldn't get opened. New options for multiple single-family user bathrooms. This is going to be nice. I'd like to say we've used it once, and what it is where you can put several multiple single user bathrooms in. And the reason we used it was because this occupancy was mainly male. However, if they would leave that building, they still have the correct amount of restrooms if it was 50-50, 50 male, 50 female. So this way everybody can use it. Open parking garage. They stuck a little thing in there last time that says we need to sprinkle an open parking garage when it's over 48,000 square foot. Dean Lanier and myself, we had a little lunch one day and we talked about this. We're taking that out. And it happens to be we have a project that's coming in, and I informed them we're going to make that local amendment if this passes. And they said it'd save them about $1 million on that project. So this is a biggie. Another one, apartments may use NFPA 13R. R is for residential sprinklers. They put a section in there that says you can only use them up to 30 foot in height. Prior to that, it's always been 60 foot. And so Dean and I talked about that again. We're going to go back to that 60 foot in height, because if they can't prove to us that they can do it hydraulically, they can't install it anyway. So this just made sense. They're putting a section in on shipping containers. I don't know that we're going to see a lot of them. We're going to see some of them maybe. You see it on the coast a lot, because that's where the shipping containers are. It might not be worth it to bring them into our locale because they have to all be shipped here. So one of the bigger items is we're going to go to the new accessibility standards. The 2017 version came out back in 2017. We've never used it. We've always used the 2009. This is the first year the IBC references the 2017, so that's what we're going to go with. And it does require bigger areas. Instead of the typical 5-foot turning circle in a restroom, it's going to be 67 inches. There's several others that are going to be required to be a little bit bigger. It's for new buildings only. It is not for additions. It is not for remodels. It is for new buildings only. And that is very specific to it. And the larger sizes, big reason, scooters. You know, we're seeing more of them. But they reiterated that to us in a class. It is for new buildings only, no remodels. Some of the things that we've modified locally previously. The definition of a fire area. This came in real big back when there was no smoking involved in public spaces. Bars wanted something. This way they could put an addition on and not allow them to sprinkle the whole thing. This was a big one back in the day. You don't see it so much anymore, but at one time it was. Number of children for daycare, we raised from 5 to 12. And the reason we do that is so that we're consistent with the South Dakota State Division of Child Care Services. That's when they start licensing is 12. This was a big one. Storm shelter requirements in a Group E occupancy. Last code cycle, we made the amendment so you only had to construct to 200 miles an hour versus 250 miles an hour. We want to leave it the same at 200. I wondered if I did the right thing last year when we had them tornadoes, but those were only up to 125, so I still feel very confident on that. Sprinklers, we're going to stay with the same. If you have 6 units or more, we're going to sprinkle it, and this matches up with what is mandated by South Dakota administrative rule. If we looked at the national code, all apartment buildings would be sprinkled. Square feet per person for a classroom, that we increased from 20 square foot to 25, and we did that because it allows for a larger classroom before 2 exits are required. Threshold for requiring an elevator, we've kept that as what ADA requires. The IBC is a little bit more strict on that. We made a few adjustments to a type A adaptable dwelling units in apartments, and we met with people on multi-housing, and that's what we agreed upon years ago, and we're going to stay with that. Significant changes to the IMC and IFGC, so it's the mechanical code and fuel gas code. There I talked about the whole house ventilation. That was in there before. It's mainly under them. It's under the IRC, but it's also in these 2 codes too. And also the under slab duct. There really wasn't a lot of changes to these 2 codes this time. Probably the biggest one was now you have dynamic fire dampers are allowed, which are going to be a little more expensive. However, if they wire it off of the smoke alarm system to shut the furnace down, they can stick with the same static dampers. What they found out was the static dampers was letting too much air across them if the air handler did not shut down. And some of the things we've modified locally on there in the past and we're staying with is the exterior support, like for an air conditioner on the outside. The national code would require 3 inches. We only require 1.5 inches, and that's because that's the product they can find locally. Ladders for roof access, you have to have anytime it's over 16 foot. The national code would say you have to go all the way to grade. We allow them to stop at 8 foot. Sloped roofs, you have to have a level surface area. This is one we've changed many years now. We make it greater than a 3-on-12 pitch instead of just a 3-on-12 and more. In residential occupancies, you would be required to have an exhaust fan, just like you do a bathroom fan. We've removed that requirement years ago. Number 5, outside makeup air. We don't require it to be cooled. We require it to be heated, but we don't require it to be cooled. If they want to cool it, that's great. We don't care, but they don't have to. The national code would say all duct systems have to be leak tested. We've never required that. We changed the depth requirement so it matches up with the plumbing code. Some of the mechanical contractors do their own, not many of them, but some, but we felt it should be matched up with the plumbing code because that's where most of them do, so we changed that. We put in an alternative for combustion air. This is something we did when we started the code back in 1994. It's much less restrictive than what the fuel gas code is, so we're just going to stay with that. The International Existing Building Code. There weren't many changes at all in this one. The changes that were all had to deal with hospitals. So my guess is somebody was either requiring too much or too little for a change on a remodel in hospitals, because it specifically says I-2s, which are hospitals and nursing homes. And that's just about every change they had on that. This time, I would like to adopt the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. We've always done with local amendments, everything. Well, they do have a code now. I would like to adopt that. It covers more. One of the things that it did do, we're going to go back to what it says. Now a permit would not be required for a swimming pool until it's 24 inches deep versus 18 that we've had before. So this will eliminate a pool for most all the little kiddie pools. So the other change that we want is it would allow a safety cover for a swimming pool. We just don't feel that safe because I know how I am. I'm going to go in the house and I'm going to forget to go back out, and it's not being watched because it doesn't have to have a fence, because it has a safety cover. We just don't feel that safe. I feel we need to have that barrier up around it, which is that fence. Spa, whirlpool, they can have safety covers yet. That's always been, we're going to stay with that too. I did meet with the Home Builders Association, the Mechanical Board of Appeals, and the Building Board of Appeals. All groups have recommended adoption to the 2021 I-codes to the City Council. I see Todd Anowski with the Home Builders is here, and I appreciate him showing up for this. But there again, we do have that good relationship with them, and I think that's part of it, taking it to them first. Thank you, and I'll take any questions you have.
Questions, councilors? Councilor Neitzer.
Butch, so this is a lot of stuff, so I'll do a few and then see if others want to go, because I circled a number of things. Okay, so going back to your townhouse definition, that's very clear. That's more than 3 units, so a twin home or a duplex is not a townhouse.
Right.
But then you did say, and it says townhouse common wall, so this diagram, does it or does it not apply to a twin home?
It will apply to a twin home, but it won't. You're right. It does not apply to a twin home. It applies to a townhouse on this one, which is 3 or more.
Okay.
A twin home is going to be different. A twin home or a two-family home is allowed a 1-hour wall now versus a townhouse, which requires a 2-hour wall.
Okay, and what is the practical effect of removing it? Just looks like there's two studs that are removed.
And what it is if you lose one 2x4 on the corner there, then this fire can go around that corner is the way it's felt. That's why it requires the 2 in the middle. So
and with all of my questions, let me preface it, I'm very sensitive to cost concerns, but I'm also sensitive to life safety. So what is what's the balance between removing 2 studs? I mean, is that really
with
that much
those,
money, or?
With those extra one 2x4 suffices for fire blocking. So with 2 of them in there, it's you know, you got a double connection there. So it was felt that this would be okay. Everybody will be out of that house before anything ever gets through to the other side. And,
Okay.
you know, as good as our fire department is, they probably got it knocked down by then too.
Okay. Whole house ventilation. So I moved into a newly constructed home, and I'm just curious, what it talks about here is something I think I actually have now, so because there is the upstairs bathroom, so we have our mechanical in the garage in a room, and then there's like a switch you turn on and off, and if that switch is on, then the fan always runs in the bathroom.
Yep.
You can kill it and then just do the bathroom, whatever. And then there's also a vent that goes out of the mechanical to the backyard.
Yes.
So I assume that was already allowed? Or?
That was allowed. This is
Yeah.
going to be a
And what-
little bit different, where it's going to make it a little cheaper, where you have to either leave that fan running all the time. There won't be a shut off on it. So you can't shut it off, or you can put a small return, outside air into that return air.
And by the way, what is the, I mean, homes are sealed pretty tight now, but what's the practical effect of turning that switch off and just using the bathroom fan when you need it and not running it 24/7?
You know, the person probably doesn't run it enough, and it doesn't exhaust enough, and doesn't bring in the fresh air that we want.
Okay. And then, okay, so egress windows are allowed to be 5 square feet in size versus 5.7 square feet.
Yes.
Now, I guess, so what, like 2.5 by 2 as an example? I don't know.
Yeah, it's got minimum sizes. It's got
4 by
to be
1 1/4.
minimum of 24 inches tall, minimum of 20 inches wide, but it must be equal to 5.0 square feet.
Okay, so all of us these days are somewhat fighting the battle of the bulge, myself included. Can anybody actually fit through a 5 square foot window? Have we tried this?
Yes, they can, and the reason we went with that 5.0 square feet, and this happened years ago, was when we worked with fire prevention, because it was felt that they could actually get somebody in there with their tanks too.
Okay, so, I mean, obviously the whole point of an egress window is to save lives, so people can get through it.
Yep.
And then the last one before I defer, because this actually, I mean, this does happen occasionally where kids get trapped in these balusters to be up to 5 inches versus 4 inches?
Yes.
Isn't 5, I don't know, what's the thought process there?
The thought process was going up a set of stairs. If you were down to 4, the home builders asked us to increase it because at that point in time it was hard to get the right number of balusters on each step. So they asked us to create it for 5 inches versus 4. I want to say that was done, oh my goodness, probably back at the beginning of the I codes, if not before. So it'd be before 2000.
Okay,
We've just never changed it.
I just don't know, like, the circumference of a toddler's head. I mean, if it's like a life
I have
safety
taken
issue.
one call on that.
Or could they actually slip through there and literally fall to the floor?
I'm not going to say it's not possible,
Yeah.
but we haven't had any problems that I'm aware of, so.
Okay, I'll defer for now.
Other counselors?
Chairman Sale?
Yes. You're on.
Thank you. Butch, can you explain to me, I've got a few questions about, why, you're not adopting the environmental provisions. You kind of talked about it generally, that you weren't going to adopt the new environmental provisions. Can you tell me, can you summarize for me what those provisions are and why we're not going to adopt them?
Could you say that again, please? I didn't quite catch all that.
In the first part of your presentation, was that on the building code? I'm not sure what the first code was you were presenting on.
The first part of the section of the code was on the International Residential Code, the IRC.
Okay. You made reference to some environmental provisions, and it sounded like there were several provisions that were done for just environmental purposes, and you had decided not to adopt those. And I just wanted to know, in a summary format, what are those all about, and why are we not adopting them?
The energy efficiency is in the energy code, which is adopted by reference, but it is also in the residential code. It's got a whole section on that, and that's where this was coming from on that.
Okay, so then the reason you're not adopting it is because it's being adopted somewhere else.
In the residential code, it has a whole section on energy efficiency, and that's where this came from.
So, okay, I'm still unclear. I just, I'm we're in the master sustainability planning, and I'm just, particularly dialed into, our, protecting our environment. So I just want to know, are we doing the utmost to protect our environment? Are we not, passing the highest codes for that, or is it just in another area, and that's why it's not in this area?
This is something that we've worked diligently with the home builders on to maintain this, and this is what we came up with.
I still don't understand. I don't understand. Are we or are we not adopting energy efficient standards that are consistent with the national code?
The national code, as I showed on that, was much more restrictive than what we are. And this kind of goes back to what the state requires too. They have adopted us and asked us to, they recommend using the 2009 code for this. And that's kind of where we're staying with, is that area. Because if I do that, then you go outside the city limits of Sioux Falls, they don't require very little. So we've kind of kept it in so the home builders could stay the same, whether they're in Sioux Falls, T, Harrisburg, whichever the case may be.
Is it a cost issue? Does it add more cost to construction to build it more environmentally safe?
Yes, they'll add a significant amount to each house.
Can you give me some examples of what kinds of things we're talking about that makes it more energy efficient?
I would have to do the cost analysis. I haven't done that, but we would have to have a cost analysis done in order to see how much it would actually raise.
Well, I will just say that, again, we are in sustainability master planning right now. We're trying to be dialed into respect for our environment. I would like to pursue this further and understand exactly what we're not doing, and if it's, and how harmful that is to our environment. Understanding, just like Councilor Neitzer, understanding there's a balance here between over-regulating and the cost of construction, and yet, on the other hand, as stewards of this country, we have issues now with global warming, and, to say that we're only going to follow the standards that were done back in 2008 or 2009, whichever you said, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that until I have more details. Because at some point, we maybe need to bring ourselves at least incrementally forward and start looking at these more energy efficient ways of operating if there's a cost savings in the impact that it has to our environment. So I would like to, maybe meet with you and find out a little more about exactly what we're talking about here.
Thank you, Councilor Brecky. Other councilors? Councilor Neitzer?
Okay, so to continue, so now smoke detectors on a remodel project can be battery operated rather than requiring to be interlocked?
Yes.
Is that new, or is that just continuation?
That's a continuation. That's the way we've done it for many, many years.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, there'd be different levels of remodels. I mean, there's one thing where maybe you're just finishing one room of a whole house. There's a whole nother where if let's say you're gutting the whole house, why not make them interlock? And they've got access to the walls.
And that's something we could do, but we've only...
Excuse me, if councilors, if you're on the phone, if you could put yourself on mute, that would be great.
we go.
What we've decided years ago is anytime we have an interior remodel of over $1,000, that's when the smoke detectors get kicked in. If they do window change outs or siding, things that we don't get in the house for, then we don't require them. We could make adjustments to that, but then it becomes very subjective.
Sure.
To what that person, the contractor, says. Well, that might not, I didn't tear open this wall or this wall. So then it puts our inspectors in a tough situation.
Yeah. This is another one where it's kind of a balance. In my previous house, they had previous homeowner finished one bedroom downstairs, and it was the only room that wasn't interlocked of the whole house. And that's the one where you likely we're not going to hear the smoke detector. You know, we were up 2 levels in our bedroom, so, you know, until it moved farther. So I wish they would have figured out how to go 10 feet and interlock it, but, you know.
And there again, it can be expensive because where'd the wires come from? Did they come from down below, or did they come from up in the attic? You know.
No, I understand. In my case, it wasn't far, but that's not the only shortcut they took, but I won't go there. So you said sprinklers are not allowed in single family. Are you telling, is the state preempted and said that we're not allowed to mandate that?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
The state of South Dakota does not allow us to require a sprinkler in a house.
Okay. And then on a separate topic, one thing I wonder if you've looked at, and maybe I would encourage you to, is related to building codes. One of the, you know, we've had some struggles with noise downtown in the past. We've had a few high-profile cases of it. And we've had, you know, we had one proprietor who spent upwards of $100,000 mitigating that, which was great. That's good that they did that. But in looking at other communities, one potential option is to beef up your code in a district like a downtown district. So you would require like maybe triple pane in the residential. You'd require like triple pane windows or higher levels of insulation, and you would make recognizing that it's an area where you have all of this stuff going on, that you would just have to build it to a higher standard. There are a few that downtown that do that already. They're doing that willingly. Of course, it costs more money, but you would reduce the number of conflicts, and it might be something to maybe chew on. That may not be a popular proposal, but.
And the way I kind of look at that, Counselor, is the codes are minimum codes. They're not maximum codes or anything like that. So I have a tough time putting that in, but we definitely could, but where do you start and where do you stop? Is it going to be only for the downtown district then, or is it going to be for all buildings?
No, I get it, and you're into life safety, so of course your minimum standard, not like what the best should be, but but it seems like it's building codes. That's why I talked to you. It would be like some sort of an overlay, or it could even be. It's hard to say like zoning, because zoning is not building. Those are two different things. But it would just prevent some conflicts down the road, because you had, you know, somebody who was doing their business happily, and then somebody builds or, you know, remodels next to them, and then suddenly they have to spend a ton of money.
Right.
You know, so that's where you have these worlds colliding. So it would have saved a lot of headaches, I guess.
Sure.
So, thanks.
Mr. Chair. I just want to thank you for working with the home builders and going out and getting in touch with the community. That's a big deal to us. I think also what you just said, this is a minimum code. You can always allow the market and competitive advantages in building to take care of some of those issues that the former counselor had brought forward. I know we talked about before, you and I, and Counselor Erickson, insulation in unfinished basements and the wood, you know, lumber that, you know, comes with that. Can you kind of refresh me on why we adopt that piece of it?
Well, what we've done is, because it belongs to a thermal envelope, and what that means is they want the outside of the house to be insulated. So if you take away the insulation on the lower level. Now I've got walls around the outside of that house that have no insulation, and that, of course, comes in. And that's what it's about. So when they talk about the thermal envelope, so if I take it on the outside wall, to get that thermal envelope, I probably have to insulate the ceiling of that basement, which that means you got to hold it up somehow. And a lot of times it's blowing in insulation. Now you go to finish that. Well, now I need to get up there to hook my wires up, to hook the plumbing up, and that all that insulation falls down and we've wasted it. So what we feel is just along the outside walls that you have to do it. It doesn't mean that you have to do any of the interior walls, just the outside wall. And if you'll notice on our sheet, we've always stayed with an R10 or an R13. And the reason we've done that is because then we can stay at a 2x4 wall. So they can use either a R13 bat or an R10 continuous foam insulation. And if they use that continuous foam insulation, of course, then they end up having to put sheetrock over it, because you have to have a thermal barrier over top of that. So that's the reason why we've done that.
Okay. Is there any consideration from you to remove that piece of the code?
I'd rather not, let's put it that way, because at that point in time, I feel I need to insulate the floor. And I think then it's, then you're at that point in time wasting that money, because that insulation is going to be ruined once you take it down.
10-4, and thank you very much for that. And again, thank you for your work on this and keeping us up to code.
Seeing no other questions, thank you very much. And I also appreciate all the work that you've done in reaching out to the partners that you have to deal with on this. And if you can get the fire department to sign off on it, I'm good with it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Next on our agenda is International Fire Code. Dean Lanier, Fire Marshal. Dean is probably in this room today, probably one of the 3 people that have actually read International Fire Code, Fire Chief being the other, me being the 3rd.
Good afternoon, Council. Dean Lanier, Fire Marshal at Sioux Falls Fire Rescue. What I've done today is basically taken about 200 pages worth of text and narrowed it down to a little bit more of a digestible amount of information for about 10 minutes. So please, if you have any questions across any of the issues that I cover, feel free to throw them at me. So one of the first areas we'll talk about is the mobile food vendor provisions that are in code. These are basically requirements that are carryovers from the 2018. What we chose to do back in 2018 was to amend this section out. At that time, we weren't exactly knowledgeable about how and when we were going to execute the provisions that were in that code. Immediately after adopting that code, we got to work, spoke with several food vendors, as well as sent written notification out to all the food vendors about what the requirements could be. After having discussions with them and talking through this issue, the ones that were represented agreed that this was a good step to take on the timeline that we proposed to them, which was January of 2022 adoption. So we are asking for this provision to be included in this code. While we'll add the provisions, we will not change permitting or licensing in any way. So the license will still be issued by the police department, and we will still follow that process, which has already been established, but we will just use the code provisions that are outlined for those mobile food vending trucks. It does not apply to every single food vending truck. If you don't have equipment that produces grease-laden vapors, principally compressed natural gas powered or liquid propane gas powered, there's really no need to have any of the other provisions that are within the code for this section. The additive manufacturing, commonly known as 3D printing. This is a unique kind of process. The intent here is to address industrial 3D printing, not in-home use 3D printing. We do have some applications that are in town that use 3D printing. One has been here quite a long time, and I could tell you remarkably, it's already addressed, that business has already addressed many of these safety precautions that were outlined in this ordinance because they were having problems with starting fires with the processing. So this is really the code finally catching up with industry standards that were put in quite a while ago. So there are some things that, that put in additional safety requirements, but it does not apply to personal use. It only applies to an industrial operation. Clothes dryer exhaust duct, and this may seem like a minuscule issue to get involved with, but yes, it's true. About 14,500 fires happened in a 4-year period just from lint from closed duct exhausts. It is pretty common. The key thing is just maintenance of it. Now, to be honest, I don't have the closed duct police as a part of my fire inspection crew to go around and look at everybody's duct. And what this will really be is an effort on our part to educate that those who have decision-making capabilities to fix this and to help them through that decision-making. When it should be done, what standards they should hope to achieve. Oftentimes that's the manufacturer's installation instructions, but honestly, this will be an effort on our part to educate people about it is a danger, it is a concern. You should think about maintaining it from time to time. Indoor play structures. Here's another interesting addition to code that specifically is trying to address large indoor plastic displays for any number of different applications. It has a threshold. In other words, there's a bottom line that you have to meet first before any of these provisions kick in. The focus here is really on the combustibility of the equipment, the slides, the tubes that are inside the play area, and whether or not they meet some basic guidelines. Principally, these items are made out of plastic and foam, and some of the displays can get kind of large. Previously, the code didn't exactly address this. It was more inferred in some of the general provisions in code. Now there's some specificity to the language to help with that. Compressed natural gas vehicle fueling. Here's another area where the code is kind of catching up with the industry with regards to providing some minimum requirements for safety. It requires the use of listed appliances, and it opens the door to on-site compressed natural gas use within a business, specifically an application like a warehouse who has quite a bit of equipment to fuel, could operate off compressed natural gas, and could actually use an application like this instead of having to go out to have that service provided. High-piled storage of lithium-ion batteries. If you just Googled lithium-ion batteries catching fire, you'd probably hit quite a few different things. This provision is specifically geared towards the high-piled storage of those batteries. The concern is the quantity and size of the storage package and whether or not that's taken into account when designing for fire protection and detection within the building. So there's a concern that maybe we're not addressing that in a comprehensive way, and there needs to be a little bit more emphasis placed on what that fuel package looks like, how big it is, and where it's placed inside a structure. Again, this would just be for large volumes of lithium-ion batteries, not small packages, again. Fire safety at construction sites is wrapping up the provisions for this year. What we're truly trying to do is increase the level of safety at construction sites. It provides another opportunity for us to educate construction companies about what are good best practices within the industry. It is being pulled from, the need for this is really being pulled from fire data that shows a growing number of incidents and a growing volume of fire damage as a result of buildings still under construction being involved in fire incidents. As you can probably well attest to, if there's no walls, if there's no protection within the building whatsoever, as the fire department shows up, there are not a lot of solutions for an entire wood structure that could be in excess of 40, 50,000 square feet on 3 or 4 stories. You know, we can do what we can do, but that's a pretty tough situation to try to resolve and not have a complete loss. So these provisions are just highlights that I pulled. They were primarily additions to the code. There are a considerable number of modifications to the code, but as I looked through it, those modifications were primarily with clarification of language and more specificity being applied to how the intent and of the code was geared towards. So with that, any questions?
Questions, councilors? Councilor Neitzer?
Dean, mobile food vehicles. So it says there's going to be a requirement for, in certain cases, if you produce smoke or grease-laden vapors, but you're not changing the permitting or licensing process. So how do you verify? Is there a verification?
So what we've done through from a previous process, we have asked vendors to get their gas locally. The reason why we did that was each of those gas vendors has a license with us, and the principal concern with having those licensed facilities involved in the process so that they could check the tanks of the mobile food vehicles and ensure that they met the minimum safety requirements for tanks. What is going to be involved in the new language, if it is adopted, is that there'll be more emphasis placed on the appliances and the lines that feed those appliances from either liquid propane or compressed natural gas. The fact that they are pressure tested, the fact that the appliances still operate within the manufacturer's specifications will be things that we check. But what we found out is, first of all, you know, we don't have the equipment nor the capability really to test every one of the food trucks that might cook on a griddle or do deep fat frying. But there are companies in town that actually provide that service. So instead of us asking, you know, or trying to inspect those, we'll just recommend that they go to one of the local businesses that provides that service, provide us receipt of that operation, and we will accept that as proof of compliance.
Okay. And then as it relates to closed dryer exhaust ducts, I can personally attest when I was in college, there was a fire in our apartment building that cleared all of us out.
Yes, sir.
They hadn't cleaned the ducts in however long. Closed dryer. Yeah. So, and I would say, I don't know if there is building or plumbing code towards this, but half the time, or at least some of the times that I've seen it, half of the problem is just goofy routings of using, you know, things that creates places for it to hang up where they take 22 turns, or they're using flexible stuff that squishes and, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And having less places for it to get caught up and collect.
Yes, sir.
So.
A pretty common occurrence, and especially at those bends and places where it has to change direction pretty dramatically. So, common occurrence.
Yeah, I should probably start a business going around with a shop vac and it's a vacuum I'm out for people. So, and then my last thing is, and you may be already aware of this, but something I've dealt with in the last couple of years, particularly with a lot of large mobile home parks is there's a hole really in the system, and it's not just fire, it's also just water in general, where the water service, our city water stops at the property line, and then they literally have hundreds of homes and thousands of feet of water pipe. And I want to just be really comfortable that we're making sure, as part of whether it be like a renewal of a permit, that they're flushing those hydrants. And because the one I was out to, the water pressure was just abysmally low. It was dangerously low, and people were literally couldn't flush their toilets, and sometimes getting these owners that are out of state to respond is difficult, and we really had to lean on them. But you know, I think they went to turn one of the hydrants and it literally broke because it was so rusty. So how do we make sure that we're making sure that they have a responsibility? They're literally running like a small water system, that those are maintained. Because we're not flushing them. I believe we go around town and we flush ours presumably once or twice a year. But what about all of these private hydrants?
There are provisions in code that we can enforce that would require the flushing of those. We had a program where we were requesting proof of flushing those hydrants. Commonly, as a practice, we don't have that on a cycle where it's done ever so many years, but it's something that we're well aware of and hope to achieve somewhere out into the future. I think you're talking about a specific
Yes.
Location
you know
that
what
I
I'm
was
talking
well
about.
aware of
Yeah.
and was involved with. There we were fortunate enough, because the property was changing hands, to be able to get some resolution to many of the utility issues with the hydrant system. So it was addressed. The situation is in a much better situation now than it was previously, but yes, there are plenty of hurdles to overcome in trying to address those problems.
Well, and as you know, we were lucky we were able to lean on the fire code, because that was something that we could use as a hammer, essentially. And with changing of ownership, they did a lot of work, to their credit, but roads and things like that. But as you know, the issue out there that I found was that you literally had you have, in some cases, you had the tenant of the mobile home, and then you had somebody who owns the mobile home, and then you have the park owner who's renting the lot to the owner of the mobile home. And literally you have, when somebody says, well, water's barely trickling out of my faucet, you've got three different people pointing at each other and blaming each other and saying, it's not my problem, it's your problem. You gotta do this. And many times these people are strapped for cash, and that's why they're calling me. They have nobody to turn to. They can't, afford some of this stuff, or they can't get any response. And so it was just, I'm telling you, I'd go out there and literally nothing. They were going and showering, at other places, or using gas station toilets. And it was, and if not for the fire code, what is the minimum standard? So that's why, and that kind of gets out of your realm. I just think about, and apartments kind of do this on a small scale, of course, but this is a big scale where I just have concerns about what if there's no maintenance on these water pipes for 20 or 30 years and the thing implodes, then what are we going to do? I mean, because we can pull their license, but then what is that? That throws everybody out on the street, Yeah. I mean, we're going to pull a mobile home license, then everybody that lives there gets punished. So what do we do? So anything we can get ahead to make sure, I think the fire code is a good way to make sure at least the water's running, the PSI is where it should be, or we're making sure it's flushing, because I think that was a big part of it. There was just so much junk in the lines, and it was just clogging them up. So,
if I could share one issue that may assist in that, probably the biggest issue that we have with properties around the city is being able to identify and define a responsible party. It's something that can chew up administrative time in a hurry, and oftentimes that is the largest part of trying to get a problem fixed, is getting to the right person who has the capability to fix the problem.
And to your point, and to finish up, you're right, there was yet another party in a situation like that. You've got the management on site who's local, But then you have owners who potentially are out of state, and sometimes they'll point at each other and say, well, the manager said I couldn't spend any money on it, and the manager says I told him to do it. And so you've got 6 different people all blaming each other and nobody doing anything. So
That would be my encouragement, is that the more clarity we have in who the responsible party is, the easier it is for us to elevate that to a person who can actually make a decision and fix the issue.
thank you.
Other counselors? Counselor Starr?
Yes. Excuse me. Fire Marshal, tell me a little bit, one of the things we heard in the previous presentation was the difference between some local amendments and what the international is requesting. Are we looking at any changes that were different for a local level versus the international level?
So, yes, we've looked at what has been in the recommended I-codes for a number of years. I can tell you we're starting to look at this from a little bit different perspective. One of the things that we're doing as an interesting endeavor is to look at what risk profiles we have within the city from a fire probability standpoint. It is a statistically based function that we go through that's pretty tedious and long and takes quite a bit of time to put together. So what we're trying to achieve is understanding the true impact of fire within our community and what does it mean to have certain building standards and codes in place at certain times. It's getting down into some really nitty-gritty details and some fine details of what has been done throughout the city over the years. But I think come the beginning of the year, we'll have a pretty comprehensive view of how things have performed as we adopted standards, what differences it made over time with the loss of lives and property. But I think we'll have a much better perspective. It's all part of what is called a community risk assessment, but it is an in-depth, deep dive into a lot of details that I'm interested in that stuff, but I don't think many other people are interested in that. But it will give us a good indication as to, as we go along and we operate and we implement these different code sections, what's the true impact on the street? Does it make a difference? Does it change the outcomes? So that's something we're very much interested in completing. And then after finishing that up, we'll have a comprehensive answer and be willing to share with the community as well as the council.
That makes sense. One of the things why we hire you is so you can be a nerd about your job. So we do appreciate that part of it. So it's
probably too much.
One of the other things that I try to balance, and we heard again a little bit in the last presentation, the same thing. What we see is businesses looking at the cost of facilities, new facilities versus doing business in Sioux Falls and balancing those loss of property, loss of life things. And sometimes we potentially, because we do have a stricter code, push those businesses into other areas where we still have to respond in a mutual aid agreement, whether it's the surrounding communities. So how can we work better possibly with those communities to say, hey, this is important too, you need to be in that part, because we're going from a professional fire department that's full-time, paid, trained. I mean, we spend some incredible money being ISO certified, the training process that we do for our firefighters, but then the things that we try to regulate to make them more safe, we push them just outside of the community and potentially in other developments around the state that we end up having to fight those same type of fires and situations. So what can we do to continue to bring people along?
I think it depends on whose perspective you're coming from and who the individual is. I can tell you that I've been surprised on more than just a few occasions of interacting with business owners who told me that they don't have a problem with the code requirements. I've had several conversations with business owners that have put 40, 50 years plus into a family-owned business, want to protect their investment, both for themselves as well as their family as they transition on, and that business moves into kids running the business now. What generally causes the end of those operations is an incident at their locations, and oftentimes the catastrophic loss that happens. Commonly, we don't see catastrophic loss unless there's been just no attention paid whatsoever to life safety code. Normal loss does not exactly occur as a result of the codes being respected and being implemented and being adopted. So in large part, I can tell you that oftentimes we don't have a whole lot of catastrophic loss within the city. Fires are generally small, they're contained to one room. We do have instances where that's not the case, but savvy business owners are well aware of, both from an insurance standpoint as well as from a business operation standpoint, why they make the decisions that they do about where they choose.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Other questions, councilors? Councilor Neitzer.
I'm assuming we do, but we have, I think you call them fire investigators.
Yes, sir.
Are they, is there a certification or some forensic training in terms of, you know, because obviously, are they qualified to testify in court looking for things like point of origin and whether it was arson or not? And
They are. We have 7 investigators right now that work on that constantly. All of them hold a national certification for fire investigation. A few of them have gone higher than that and achieved a higher level of certification that really is kind of the culmination of doing a lot of work. There are a lot of requirements to be able to meet the minimum requirements to even get that certification. And often it's how many fires have you investigated and the training that you've received. So I'm very comfortable with the level of certification and training our investigators have. They are really good at what they do. It would probably surprise you how often they come to a conclusion about fire incidents, but they are a cut above. There's no doubt about that.
just out of curiosity, do insurance companies send in their own, or do they lean on local jurisdictions? Or?
Yes, they do, and it's ironic that you ask that question because often insurance agents come to us. Many of them we've developed a relationship over the years, and they'll come in and look at what we've done and kind of turn their head sideways at us and say, yeah, I agree with your conclusions. You're right on target.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, comments? I'll just make a few comments. I appreciate all your hard work to keep us at that great ISO rating that we have here in Sioux Falls, and it benefits us all with our insurance rates. And secondly, it is Fire Prevention Week, and I would like everybody to check their smoke detectors when they get back and check their vents for their dryers, as we all know, because of those things. Seeing nothing else, thank you very much for what you've done. At this point, we're going to public comment. If anybody has a comment about any of the codes that we've talked about today, you have up to 5 minutes. No, for the informational meeting, you get to speak on what's on the agenda. Please come up and address the council. You have 5 minutes, and please keep it to the building codes and the codes we've talked about.
Oh, only building codes?
Only for this meeting, public comment is for
I
these.
could talk about with the flu shot and stuff.
We do have that available at our meeting tonight.
All right.
Thank you.
I might not be here.
Seeing no other public comment, this meeting's adjourned.